Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Tomson, and I'm the Director of Forums here at Civic Hall. And I am very pleased, as the Director of Forums, to introduce tonight's forum topic, Democracy Beyond Elections, a New Deal for Our Broken Democracy, which we are in partnership on with the Participatory Budgeting Project. And to kick us off tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce Shari Davis, the co-executive director of the Participatory Budgeting Project. Shari worked in government in the city for Boston for nearly 15 years and launched the country's first youth participatory budgeting effort there. So Shari, she's going to kick us off tonight. So can you please help me welcome Shari to the stage?
So Danielle outed me. I am a former government employee. So shout out to all the folks that have worked in government or aspire to. That work is really important. Also, we're live streaming today. So if you want to share that with other folks, please keep that in mind. But just for our speakers and for folks that are in the room, keep mind of your volume, because that will likely pick up on the live stream. And so welcome again, everyone, and a big thank you to Civic Hall. Can y'all make some noise for Civic Hall, y'all? I believe that we're here today because we all believe in the potential of democracy, the capacity of our communities, and that we recognize our community members as assets. And we know, and we've seen, that those that are most proximate, those that are closest to issues, are often closest to the solutions to solve them. And so with our work at the Participatory Budgeting Project, we've really thought about what that looks like. And at PBP, we have one mission, and that is to decide together and to empower people really to decide together how public funds are spent through something called participatory budgeting. And as we've done this work, a thing that we've thought about and really challenged ourselves to think about is often what we see with social change organizations and those that are doing social change work is that it can happen in a silo. Raise your hand if you feel like that work can happen in a silo sometimes. And so we've really started to challenge ourselves to think about how we break that silo down and begin to bring folks together and collaborate to really find alignment and to address what some of these issues are. I imagine there's a slide clicker somewhere. Thank you very much. And so we've really challenged ourselves to think about what this work looks like in ways that truly and definitively breaks down silos. And that's where this conversation of democracy beyond elections really started. And we're very excited to work with some amazing partners to think about this and to think about what collaboration in this space looks like. And so today, we're kicking off a conversation that we really hope is an emerging campaign that we're developing with this coalition of amazing partners, as I mentioned, to really expand and think about how we reshape and redefine authentic democracy in the United States, but really work together to push that effort forward. When we talk about democracy beyond elections, we're referring to programs, initiatives, interventions that really enable community members to directly participate in making political and policy decisions that affect their lives beyond voting in elections. And we know that voting is incredibly important. And so I shared a little bit of why we started having this conversation. But to ground even further, we've really started thinking about the fact that our current mode of democracy is failing a lot of folks, that it's designed to represent. And civic engagement and other responses to systemic issues of democracy view voting as something that's really important, voting in local and national elections. And we know that that's true. But I think that the real moment when we're able to grow and flex civic muscles is when we think about what happens beyond and between local and national elections. So we have to see people be engaged and mobilized beyond the moment where a representative is elected, and we can't just lose folks the moment that an election is over. So this campaign is really born around asking some of these questions, and really this one: what would it look like if community members felt empowered and equipped to to have a real voice in the decisions that affect their lives. And as we started thinking about this, we thought about the amazing work that happens across the United States, but we also started thinking about the amazing work that happens across the country and the globe. So beyond the US, how do we start to think about the things that are really going to impact and shift what's happening here? And we looked at some of the bright spots of civic engagement, of real democracy. And these are the speakers that I'm going to bring up in just a few moments. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about why we selected these examples. And these 4 case studies that we did in this landscape analysis, shout out to the Ford Foundation for supporting us in doing that. These 4 case studies are real examples, as I mentioned, of these bright spots. And they were selected because there are a few things that are similar, and there are also some really, really key differences. All 4 of these case studies are located in developed countries with relatively high levels of social and economic inequality. But they reflect a variety of approaches to democracy beyond elections, and they vary in terms of where they're placed between municipal interventions, national interventions, and citywide participatory democracy examples. And so to give you a sneak peek, and I imagine you all have also seen this executive summary and overview, to give you a sneak peek of what some of the speakers are going to talk about is one, Decide Madrid in Spain has sparked the design of several major infrastructure projects, and 2 proposals initiated by citizens have been voted on by the public and transformed into public policy by City Council. This has included a 100 million euro PB process. Scotland has adopted the Community Empowerment Act, which gives citizens more say. Now, there is a national mandate for participatory budgeting with 1% of all local government funds. In Ireland, a deliberative citizen assembly composed of 99 randomly selected Irish citizens met intensively over the course of a year to learn from experts, deliberate, and offer recommendations on 5 important issues facing the country. One of their recommendations resulted in a national declaration of a climate emergency, and another resulted in a groundbreaking referendum to change the Constitution to legalize abortion. This direct vote was one that had groundbreaking voter turnout. Right here in New York City, PBNYC is in its 9th cycle, including PB processes in public schools across the city. A ballot referendum this fall grew this work even further by establishing a citywide civic engagement commission that will improve inclusion across the city, including setting up a citywide PB process. And so moving beyond this conversation today, this is hopefully, really just the beginning of what we are envisioning could happen here as we come together to think about what we want democracy beyond elections to look like and what the possibilities of that are. To stay connected with this work, and I promise to mention this again, to stay connected with this work and see that full report of the landscape analysis that I just referenced, you can stay connected with us by visiting participatorybudgeting.org/DBE, which stands for Democracy Beyond Elections. I'll also mention that a couple times, so get excited for that. So now I'm going to bring up our speakers, and before they come up here, I just want to tell you who they are. So Miguel Arana Catania, the former director of citizen participation, traveled all the way from Madrid. Louise Caldwell, entrepreneur and member of the Ireland Citizen Assembly, is here to join us. Fiona Garven, director for the Scottish Community Development Centre and Community Health Exchange, is here as well. And Dr. Sayeed, the chair and executive director of the Civic Engagement Commission right here in New York City, is joining us as well. Please, a thunderous round of applause for our amazing speakers this evening. To kick us off, I wanted to start with this question. Why is this idea of democracy beyond elections important? And how does it show up in the work that you're already doing?
My name is Sayeed, and I'm the Chair and Executive Director of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission, which is the new entity. This is going to be central to the work of the CEC. We are looking, as was mentioned, to expand participatory budgeting. But there are other pieces of the Civic Engagement Commission, other tracks, which include strengthening community boards to make sure that they are reaching the diverse communities of New York. Also improving language access at poll sites, and just overall sort of strengthening the civic fabric, which I think is all about extending beyond elections.
Great, and we can just come right down the row. And my hope is that as you guys answer this question, you can share a bit of what your story that brought you here to this idea and this work was. Like, what brought you to the Civic Engagement Commission? And is there anything that you're particularly excited to share? Just an overview, if you have anything to add. And then the rest of you can kind of build on that as you layer in your experiences.
Yeah, sure. So I'm really coming to this work from the perspective of having worked at City Hall for the past 4 years, really building out the Muslim engagement strategy for the administration. I was actually the first person ever in New York City to be in this role. And it was a really important moment to play that role, particularly given post 9/11 and the fractured relationship between the Muslim community and the police department. So there's a lot of opportunity that I've had to help strengthen the relationship and try to restore some of the trust. So trust building is a very long-term kind of activity, and it's very easy to lose trust. And even in the process of trying to restore it, you have to be very mindful, right? And so that's the lens I'm bringing to this work, is just how do we improve access and engagement with diverse communities who've never really had a relationship to government before, right? And there are different ways that you can build that relationship. You can be in, civil society, nonprofit sector, trying to forge that relationship, and I played that role while I was at the Interfaith Center of New York. We did a lot of programming with grassroots religious leaders to try to connect them better with government. But to play that role from within government, is a different kind of work, because I have to sort of pay attention to how people might not trust me as a governmental actor. So there's, it's been really rewarding to be in the space, and I'm hoping to continue, doing that work with diverse New Yorkers from all communities. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Fiona Garven. I'm from the Scottish Community Development Centre, and I come to this work around democracy from the point of view of a community development worker. I think you people call it community organising here in the United States. Basically, I've been a community development worker from when I was 18, and I've worked in community development in a personal and a professional capacity. And certainly working across all those decades, because there's been a few decades in Scotland since I was 18. It's been a real journey that we've been on. And while you can often get frustrated about the pace of progress, when I look back now to what we've got in Scotland in terms of legislative levers and in terms of policy that's sort of supportive of democratic renewal and democratic involvement, it's night and day from when I was a grassroots community worker. So from that point of view, I think that we're basically still on a journey in Scotland. I don't think changes to democracy happen overnight. I think it's a long game, it's a long gig. But certainly, even though we've had some frustrations at the pace of progress, I can actually see some of the changes that we've made, and I'm just really excited about it, and quite happy to share with what we've been doing so far as we go through tonight. So great to be here as well. This is my first time in New York. I think it's fantastic.
Now, Miguel, as you share your story, you might want to bring up a couple of slides. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. So why don't you come on down? Why is this idea of democracy beyond elections important, and how does it show up in the work that you're already doing?
Well, I'm going to just show very briefly what we have been doing. My name is Miguel Arana. I've been working the last 4 years in the City Council in Madrid, where we try to be ambitious and try to open as much as we can the institution to the people, and to let the people take the most important decisions on the City Council. And we created this project that was called the Consul Project. It was a digital platform to allow really the people to be involved in the daily work of the City Council from the very beginning. that was something that was started actually outside the city council, because before the city council, and that was the important transition moment, we had a huge social movement in Spain for 4 years, some kind of like Occupy Wall Street version in Spain. It was called the Indignados, the Indignant movement. In a wave of movement where after the Arab Spring, there was in Spain, the Occupy, and then we saw the movements in the umbrella movement in Asia, in Turkey, and so on. So there was a moment where we saw that globally the people were asking for a different kind of institution, where people were saying like, okay, we have really to go beyond elections. I think one of the important things is probably when we're not going beyond elections, always democracy is about the elections. It's about who has the power, it's about the politicians, the people, and we're like obsessed with that. And I think we understood that we should stop talking about that and just focusing on the problems and the solutions, so trying to work differently with democracy. So we developed this project to try to just focus on that, on what is happening with the city and what can we do. We built this digital platform as an open source platform we can share also with other governments to start involving people. So, for example, we had citizen proposals. People can send ideas for the city and just collect support, and then the proposal who get more support, we just do it. So people create ideas and we just do it in the city council. We had a space for example, this one, some of the ideas that people were voting was mentioned before. For example, people were proposing a plan to have a more sustainable city. People were proposing to change the public ticket of transport of the city. So suddenly the people focus not on the politician, not on the political parties, but on what we want to change in our city. And wow, with the environment, the public transportation, wonderful. So it really changed the game on what is democracy and what is politics. We were voting also, for example, there was a space for voting on redevelopments on the city. For example, what is one of the main squares of the city, and where people were voting which square they wanted and how they imagined the new square before, if they wanted to have like more bike lanes or trees or parking spots or whatever. So really try to involve the people in the decisions in the city. For example, this is the new square that we're going to have in Madrid. It was voted and decided and designed by the people in Madrid. We were also involving people in the daily decision, in the regulation, in the new ordinances and the new laws in the city. Every time we have changed a new regulation, we have open space for people to really be part of it, having debates on the most important issues on the new regulation, or just getting proposals on how to do the regulation, or even just working on the legal text. That was very important. Every time there was a new regulation, we published the legal text and people were able to comment the different parts, like this part is not good and we have a new idea for that part, and so on. So not just the general things, but all the very specific things that we're doing. And we saw how efficient we get when we open to the collective intelligence of the city and we involve in people. Because also there's something that happened inside the government. We are used to work only with our experts, and usually always there are brilliant experts inside. But when we open the possibility for the outside experts to be part of it, we discovered that there are many more experts outside and they are really willing to participate and be part of it. And then even the public workers and the people inside are really surprised and say, wow, we have done this much before, because it's really great. And of course, participatory budgeting, that was also very important. But for us, it's very important to emphasize that this is only like one part, one way to involve people. But there's a lot of ways to involve people, and it's great to really open as many as we can. We have been doing this 100 million euros participatory budgeting every year, so people were proposing a lot of ideas and projects for the city and the district, and voting how they want to use the money. Every year we have around 300 projects that we're winning, and from big projects like having a new network of bike lanes all over the city to something very specific for the district. And again, when we see the results and where people were voting, we are really amazed. Half of the projects where people were voting had to do with the environment, to have a more green, clean, sustainable city. Half of them had to do with social issues, like gender violence, like homeless, like people with Alzheimer's disease, and so on. This is like the top proposal that were voted. So it was great really to discover how people were responsible with the money and what we were doing. So it's really changing the thing. And just the last image that I want to share, this is very important. This project, we have been doing it not alone, and this is very important not to work alone. We made this platform as an open source platform. So we offer it to other governments to use it. It's free, you can just take it, use it, and it's perfect. And now there's more than 130 cities using the same platform, working together. any kind of governments, like more liberal, more conservative governments, working together, forgetting about the political parties, the situation, the ideologies, understanding that they have to include this new kind of democracy, and if we work together, it's going to be better. So big cities like Buenos Aires, even national governments like Colombia, like Jalisco, whatever places. So it's really something that's a new trend, it's something changing, and it's great also to see how we can collaborate with the civil society, but also between governments to make it more effective and more, to have a deep impact in our societies. Thank you very much.
And next up, Louise, tell us more about your work and how it connects to this idea of democracy beyond election.
Okay, hi everybody, my name's Louise and I've come from Dublin in Ireland to share my experience. So my experience is quite different than everybody on the panel. I was one of the randomly selected assembly members on the Irish Citizens' Assembly that took part from 2016 to 2017. I answered a knock on my door one day and there was a guy there just with a clipboard and he was asking me questions and would you like to take part in this assembly? I really had no idea what he was talking about. I've no political background, no real engagement in anything political or social, and I had been at home for 2 full months with my 3 children, and this man was standing on my doorstep offering to bring me to a hotel once a month to talk to grown-ups about grown-up things. So I said, yes, okay, I don't care what it is, I'm going. That's the true story. That's how I got involved, basically. There was no other way about it. That's how I got involved, and we started in October 2016, and we ended our deliberations on our first topic in May 2017. As a direct result of our recommendations, the government set up a parliamentary committee which basically went through a mini citizens' assembly. They had their own version of it, just an abridged version. And then the country went to a referendum and we saw basically within a percentage point that the country voted exactly as 100 citizens had voted to change the abortion laws in Ireland. So it was fascinating to see that, given that once we had made our recommendations and published them, there was widespread shock, awe, horror. Oh my God, this has gone too far, this will never pass. But it did, it really did. And the deliberations that we had, I suppose, paved the way for the rhetoric and for the discussion and for the talking points to change, because a topic like abortion is obviously very polarizing a topic. So we had in the media, we had very much a strong yes and we had very much a strong no, and the sense was through the assembly process that really there was the black and the white, but the vast majority of people sat in this wide grey area in the middle. And what the Citizens' Assembly allowed to come about was for time and space to be given to that grey area, to allow people to discuss, to allow people to hear from experts, and to allow people to give some deep thought and deep, attention to a topic. And it's not the only topic we discussed. At the end of that set of recommendations, we moved on to our climate change recommendations, which are now coming up for the parliamentary committee going on at the moment in relation to how we're going to take up some of those recommendations. But I'll end by saying that it's very important to get to the point where we have more day-to-day people involved in large decisions. The assumption is that, my opinion doesn't really matter. What would I know about that? How would I be able to affect any change? But I believe if there is a mechanism there and there is a process available, that people will engage with it if they are asked. But you have to ask people to get involved. And I think that what we're seeing in Ireland now, and we've just called now what will be our third Citizens' Assembly. So the first one, there was a bunch of recommendations, but we had our marriage equality referendum out of that. So we were the first country to put into law, constitutional right to same-sex marriage. That was in 2015. 2018, we had the abortion referendum. We're now having a Citizens' Assembly has just been called for 2 topics. One is for gender equality, And the second one is actually a more local one, which is our first time to do something local. We've always gone big. Now we're trying to get a little bit more micro on it. So it's around the Dublin City Council and how the City Council is run, which is new. So that was really all I wanted to say, is that, as much as possible, the more that these types of initiatives can reach a variety of people from all walks of life, the more benefit for everybody, because everybody has something to offer. Everybody, from the truck driver to the person who's a CEO of a very large firm. I've seen it in roundtable discussions, in a hotel, week in, week out. Everybody had something to contribute, and that's what needs to be heard.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the importance of inclusion and really recognizing that folks are truly assets. And I think this brings me back a bit to Dr. Sayeed's work here with the Civic Engagement Commission. Being the first person in this role, can you tell us more about how you found yourself in this space and really what the Civic Engagement Commission is and what you hope it turns out to be?
I think we're at a turning point and a moment of juxtapositions today. On the one hand, we are seeing that voter turnout is declining. We are also seeing at the same time people entering the public square for the first time, right? And there are structural barriers to voting, and people also feel disenchanted because they don't think government is being responsive to the real needs and real voices of diverse communities. And at the same time, I think that from my experience in the past 4 years, there are people who are very excited to help get out the vote and hold voter registration drives. There are people excited to volunteer for a campaign for the first time, to help get a woman elected for the first time in their council district. So I think we're seeing a lot of different juxtaposed emotions about this moment and the potential and promise and also the letdown of the way democracy has been exercised. And when I was actually interviewing for the position of senior advisor in the community affairs unit, I was actually reading a book, some of you might have heard of it, it's by Parker Palmer, called Healing the Heart of Democracy, The Courage to Create a Politics Worthy of the Human Spirit. And one of the central premises of this book is that the heart is what really matters in democracy, right? Cynicism, despair, frustration, these are all emotions. And we've got to be able to navigate our hearts, and we've got to be able to open our hearts to listen to diverse opinions. And I think that's the moment that we're in right now, is how do we expand the public square to include more voices? But that's not just an exercise in numbers. It's really about how can we talk to each other? How can we listen to one another across lines of difference? So I think what we need to be doing is not only creating new ways for people to participate, but sort of breathing life into older forms of participation that have excluded people. So for instance, the traditional town hall, one of the things Mayor de Blasio did is hold a town hall in every council district, right? That opened the door for so many people to experience what it felt like to be in a town hall space. So I think there's a mixture of things we need to do. And the Civic Engagement Commission is going to be, I think, helping New Yorkers connect more to the opportunities that already exist that they might not know about, but also creating new avenues of participation. And for those who don't know the story, and I guess I'm guessing most people here are New Yorkers, so I don't want to tell you a story that you already know, which is how the CEC was birthed and created. But as you know, we did hold hearings across the 5 boroughs, and people decided that they wanted this commission. And when we started the Charter Revision Commission from the mayor, we had no idea that this would end up on the ballot. We didn't know that there would be a CEC that people wanted. We didn't know that participatory budgeting was something people wanted to see. And so I think it's very exciting to be in a moment now where it's not every day that New Yorkers decide that they want a new entity created to sort of build their engagement. And one of the things I've been learning about is what else is going on in this space. Even within government, there's a bunch of things that are happening that I don't know if everyone here knows about them. So I just want to share really quickly that there is a civic engagement ecosystem that the Civic Engagement Commission is a part of. And it includes agencies like NYC Service, which has been operating since 2009 to build volunteer engagement in New York. And volunteering is an important aspect of civic engagement because it builds issue awareness and it builds understanding of how people can make decisions on issues that impact their daily life. The Public Engagement Unit, which since 2015 has been using door-to-door canvassing and block walking techniques to make sure New Yorkers in hard-to-reach areas have been connected to city services. People who've traditionally not connected to government now have more opportunities to enroll in healthcare, help get eviction prevention services, et cetera. Democracy NYC is another initiative that's going to be working on voter registration. There's also more initiatives to involve youth. Democracy Core, which will be infusing summer youth employment program, which has been operating for years. We will have a project-based learning approach in that to help young people, 14 to 15-year-olds, learn more about civic engagement. There's a Civics for All curriculum. There will also be participatory budgeting in about 48 schools in the city, so there's a lot going on. And I'm really looking forward to helping New Yorkers connect better to these opportunities, and also really looking forward to learning from what's already happened in the city and from my colleagues across the world, really, to help the Civic Engagement Commission fulfill the hope and promise of New Yorkers who brought it to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think especially for folks that are joining us in the live stream, it's really helpful because there are folks far beyond New York City that are listening to this conversation, and hopefully can layer some of this thinking into their approach as they're considering what democracy beyond elections looks like and means for them. And Fiona, I want to create an opportunity for you to describe more about the Civic Empowerment Act, how it came to be, and what it really means and does in practice for you all.
Yeah, okay. As I explained before, we've been on a journey over a couple of decades in Scotland, particularly since devolution and the event of our own Parliament, Scottish Parliament. So it's quite a lot to cover in just 3 to 5 minutes. So I thought I'd focus on 3 things that I thought might be helpful for you. And one is, what is the problem we are trying to solve, right? The second one is a notable milestone, and that was the event of a set of national standards for community engagement. And then the third one it culminated in the Community Empowerment Scotland Act, and I can tell you a wee bit about that. It's still fairly early days. It was just started to be enacted in 2015. So, first of all, what's the problem we were trying to solve? Has anybody been to Scotland before? Quite a few folk, yes, great, good for our tourism industry. Those of you who have been, and even those of you who have not been but have heard about Scotland, you'll know it's rich in natural assets. Fantastic scenery, fantastic place, it's rich in culture and heritage and whiskey and all these kind of things. But it's a really unequal place, right? There's 1 in 4 children in Scotland live in poverty, and they're often in families that are in work, okay? Your life expectancy in Scotland, there can be 14 years difference in male life expectancy in Scotland depending on where you live. And sometimes that's between an area that's 7 miles apart. Do you know what I mean? So it's really, really stark. The other thing is in Scotland, we've got an ageing demographic in Scotland. We've got lots of people living longer but not necessarily living healthier, and our public services are under strain, right? We can't cope. There's a crisis looming, and therefore there's been a lot of thinking in Scotland about how we reconfigure the relationship between the citizen and the state. And that's for 2 reasons, and that's because there is a belief that democracy is healthy, it's good for you. When people have got agency, when they've got a stake, when they feel as if they can influence change, you're going to get happier citizens, you're going to get better health and social outcomes. And there's also a recognition that communities can often do things that are better, more efficient, better for people than public services. right? Communities can get to people that public services can't get to. So from that point of view, there's a real need to think about how we empower communities and support them to meet the needs of their own, right? So that was the kind of problem that we were looking to solve in Scotland, and we've been doing that over a series of years. Now, there's been loads of stuff written into policy in Scotland. The reason I picked the national standards was because they lead up nicely to the Community Empowerment Scotland Act. We've got complicated planning processes in Scotland, but actually dating back to the 70s, there's been an imperative or there's been a duty for public bodies to engage communities, but they didn't do it very well, right? So a lot of community activists who were involved in what we called social inclusion partnerships a while ago basically complained about this, and they said, wait a minute, you talk about engaging us in decision-making processes, you're engaging us in peripheral issues, you want us to choose the colour of our bins, right? But you're not interested in terms of our opinion, in terms of where spending in health should go and so on. So from that point of view, they were angry about that and said, we need to have some kind of code, we need to have some kind of statement of principles that says what good community engagement is. And so we got ministerial endorsement to take forward a process whereby we developed a set of national standards. The organisation that I work for facilitated, we didn't write them, we facilitated a participatory process over 2 years, engaging about 600 citizens and officials and so on, to develop a set of national standards. Now, you will all be familiar with the kind of principles. It's about, like, how do we involve people? How do we make sure we're inclusive? How do we make sure we're transparent? How do we make sure we use methods that are fit for purpose? I don't have any slides, but I've got a visual aid here. That's the national standard. They're available on our website. Did they do the trick? Did they actually lead to anything, you know, in terms of any kind of significant impact? Well, they did and they didn't. They tended to be used where there was already a kind of predisposition to wanting to do good community engagement. They weren't mandatory. They were there to try and change a culture, right? But nobody had to use them. It was just a kind of code. So they did. They're now embedded in policy and so on, but they didn't actually really achieve the changes that we wanted to see. They didn't have that much in the way of teeth, if you like. So wind forward a few years. A lot of discussion about actually trying to get something with some kind of guts and punch behind it. And so a lot of discussion started about the Community Empowerment Scotland Act. Now, to be fair in government in Scotland, you know, much the same as the development of the national standards, there was real commitment to a consultative and participatory process in terms of developing the legislation. And they engaged with a whole range of NGOs, they engaged with a whole load of citizens. We, as an organisation, set up a lot of opportunities for government to speak to people, do you know what I mean, to try and get their views on what should go in the legislation. And so from that point of view, by the time the Community Empowerment Scotland Act was enacted, people were waiting on it, they knew it was coming, they helped shape it, right? So from that point of view, it was then used better than other bits of legislation. It's a complicated bit of statute, there's 10 different sections to it, but what it does is it places new duties on public services to engage properly with communities and provide the right support resources, particularly for communities who are marginalised. It also produces rights for communities to request to buy or transfer land and buildings for wider community benefit, and it also has something called participation requests, which puts the rights of communities firmly in a legislative footing to be heard. Okay? So that's what it does, very quickly, because I know we've only got a minute left. Since it's been enacted, it's early days, there's been 22 asset transfers, successful asset transfers, and those are things for community land and buildings that are there. They're social enterprises, they're learning hubs, they're places for children to meet, for youth work and so on. There's been around 19 participation requests. There have been things as dull as car parking, but also participation requests around opening hours of services, how services should be shaped, how participatory budgeting processes should be designed, for example. So, as I say, early days, what we believe is that we keep supporting people to use this legislation will develop a critical mass of community-run and community-led decisions and community-led initiatives that help support that to be part of the way that our democracy works in Scotland. So, thank you.
I told you we had some bright spots, and that was no exaggeration. And I think one of the things that I'm wondering about, and this question goes to all the panelists, as you all have described this amazing work that you're doing that's really complex. I haven't heard anything that was not what I would describe as complex. And I do think we're talking about solving complex issues. And so the solutions may also be complex. I'm curious to know what pushback you received or what pushback you've seen as you've grown and worked with these initiatives. What has been the response of those in leadership? And how have you worked to win folks to really think about what this work looks like beyond elections and to get them to yes in their investment?
And I think it's not so complex as we imagine. It looks very complex, this is the thing. And always when we try to start all these kind of new processes and all the cities we have worked, and we have worked in more than 100 cities all over the world, always we are very afraid. We think, okay, this is not gonna work, people are gonna take really wrong decisions, gonna be chaos, it's always, every time. And not only from the government, also from the people itself. I mean, when we say to people, now you can decide, and then people say, but really, we can decide? And it's like, really? Yeah, you can. And it's always the case, so it's quite natural. We are get used to it, and no problem. But it's more like a feeling. We feel it's very complex, difficult, and maybe it's not going to work. But if we really look at the real data, the cases, because there are more than 5,000 cities all over the world doing participatory budgeting. So it's not something that we are inventing right now. It is new, whatever. We have a lot of cases. There are examples of like direct democracy processes from the last 100 years, like in Switzerland, but also here in the States, in Germany, in many places. So there's thousands and thousands of cases to really compare and see what happened. And it's always this kind of same results. I mean, the majority of people start taking more care about how to spend the money of the institution, so the public debt is reduced. The majority start taking more respecting and protecting the minorities. The human rights is happening everywhere, in all cases, in the last 100 years, in all cases of participatory budgeting. So when you do it, always this is the same result. Of course, you have to experience it to discover that the people around you is the same as everywhere in the world, and you have to go through this process. But we can be quite sure that this is really improving our systems everywhere. And if it's working everywhere, of course, it's going to work here. And I think also this is important that you mentioned before, and also you mentioned that it's very important having this conversation and also learning from each other, because we have seen that it's really, and I think this is a really important opportunity, what is happening here in New York. I mean, New York is going to be a very important reference for a lot of cities all over the world, what happened here. So you have really important opportunity to be really ambitious and go really beyond elections and go deep into things, or just do something basic and not to produce so much impact in the world. And when we started for example, in the case of Madrid, and when we started, we never had any kind of civic participation mechanism at all in our whole history in the city. No participatory budgeting, no consultation, no referendums, nothing at all. And then the mayor said, okay, let's do it. Let's do everything. Let's do everything that is being done in any city. Let's do everything from scratch. Perfect. And we say, wow, let's do it. And from the very beginning, it worked really great. From the very first year, we had this 100 million euros participatory budgeting and consultation and referendums and voting about the squares and everything. And everything worked, as every city, perfect. And then it helped to set like new standards globally. So a lot of cities look at that and said, okay, we can do the same. I mean, it's not so difficult as it looks, because they got from scratch to everything and it worked. So we can do the same. And then this is why I mentioned that it was so important to work together with all the cities to build this network of cities that, of course, we also invite you to join, to work together and not to try to reinvent the things and try to look at things as if were more complex, because really it's much more easy than we imagine, and I think here is also going to be the same.
Thank you, Miguel. What I'm hearing you say is a big piece of dealing with this pushback is looking at data, trying it out, and learning from not only your experience, but the experience of others. Yeah. I'm curious for the other panelists, can you talk a little bit about how you've moved past moments of conflict and pushback as you've done this work?
So just to speak a little bit about within the Citizens Assembly that I was a part of, it was very important for us as a group, and each weekend we had a different table and a different group. We were intentionally mixed every time. So a very important part of our method of operation was our code of conduct and the facilitation at the tables. Without strong facilitators at each table, you better be really careful, because some people can take over the conversation and that can be very demotivating for others. So from just a day-to-day part, it's very important to have really good facilitators. What was interesting for me personally that happened outside of the Citizens Assembly, the skills that you learn as part of a group like an assembly, those are skills that you're going to have for the rest of your life. skills that you're mirroring from others, you're learning from watching others. It's just from being in the room, you're seeing how to have very difficult conversations, how to find common ground, how to ask questions. Now, obviously, one of the topics that we were talking about was really personal and a very difficult topic. And I thought maybe that was why we were all being so polite and nobody was really kind of saying what they felt, or, you know. And I genuinely, I thought, okay, that's why this is like this. But it was actually the same for all the other topics. You know, the tone was set where people were just curious. There was an atmosphere of curiosity, and there was also an atmosphere of people took this very seriously. They took it very seriously. They thought, I've been asked to do this really important job, and I'm going to take it really seriously, and I'm going to do my best. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to try to understand all this crazy stuff that these absolute PhD head people are saying to me, and I have no idea what they're saying. And you're trying to make sense of people who have 10 years of academic learning and deep knowledge on a subject. And you're just coming in off the street, and you have no idea about some of these topics at all, and you're trying your best to listen to that, to try to contextualize it, to try and discuss it, to try and piece it apart, and then to try and say, right, well, what can we do next that's going to be impactful, that's going to make a change, that's going to be meaningful? Because the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is to make recommendations that are going to be defunct, you know, almost immediately. You know, you want to be thinking about, right, what's the current situation, but what's the future situation, and can we do things now that are going to prevent us being in this, you know, situation down the line? So it's really to try and put your future head on as well. You also then, you become motivated, not just politically, but socially. You know, in Ireland now, in the last local elections, we had something like 1,000 women join a group called Women for Election as a direct result of the momentum from the canvassing for the 8th Amendment, which was the abortion referendum. So it mobilized a lot of women that had never even considered politics or social engagement on any level. So, you know, if you can get people to engage with the process, from the next step, you don't know, you have a little champion and they're going to go off and they're going to create all sorts of conversations with people, and they're going to educate each other, and everybody brings each other along the way.
Something that I talk about often, it's really how do we arm community members with the skills and resources to be able to navigate government. And I think broad systems change is really rooted in being able to do that. And part of that is inviting them in and setting them up for success. So setting people up for success looks like excellent facilitation for sure. Other thoughts from you all on how we move past pushback?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in Scotland there's probably, well, 2 points of resistance that are worth talking about. In terms of trying to kind of progress a more participatory democracy and community empowerment agenda. And one is from elected representatives, because they see participatory democracy as a threat. And in actual fact, what we're talking about is that participatory democracy can sit alongside representative democracy. They're not mutually exclusive, actually they're mutually beneficial. Among some less progressive elected members, there's been some points of resistance, I would say. And also in public services, we've got a lot of fantastic public servants in Scotland, but we've also got a tendency for people when they go into public service to think that they're the experts, right? And they've got the knowledge and they didn't train for years to be a doctor or a planner or a, you know, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Just to hear from people in the community. We need to rethink the role of the public servant and actually think about how you get that necessity to engage with people and users of services as part of the work that we do, not something that's additional to what we do. That's the job, right? So we've spent quite a lot of time in Scotland talking about that in terms of supporting people to adopt a role and to actually think about that. But quite often, I mean, sometimes people come straight into public service jobs having done a master's or a PhD or a degree in something, you know, scientific or accountancy and stuff, that they've never really learned how to be a public servant. So there's something that we need to do differently around that.
Yeah, and I also think that what you're speaking to there is that there are different kinds of expertise, right? Yeah. There's content expertise and there's context expertise. The folks that walk on a street every day or go to a school or experience this community in X way have a level of expertise that should not only be reflected, but we need to figure out how to translate that amongst folks that have experienced a different sort of background as well.
Just from the work that I've been doing, I think the biggest barrier is making sure we provide access to people to government. And as somebody working in government, I'm very aware of the challenges of reaching out to diverse communities and helping them, sort of engage beyond the barriers that people have barriers to engagement, including basic things like just the time to engage, right? A lot of people out there, particularly marginalized communities, people are just busy trying to get by, and just even if you are not, you're just busy trying to live your life, and some people are busy shopping. So I think there's a lot of barriers and there are a lot of distractions to engagement. So I think one of the first tasks and work for the Civic Engagement Commission is to really put ourselves on the map, because even though New Yorkers voted for this, I'm wondering how many New Yorkers actually know that we exist. So we're hoping to do something like listening sessions just to get out there more, connect to people through social media, all of these avenues of communication, just to say we're here and we're interested to see what people's experience of civic engagement has been.
I think that's a really important point, where we start from. I think so often when we talk about civic engagement, we tend to jump to different places. But I think what you're describing as you move the CEC forward is really being able to design with and not for, which I think is a really important principle in what this work looks like. In just a couple moments, I'm going to open up to take some questions from the audience. So if you have a burning question, think about what that is now, and Danielle is going to be coming around to collect some of those questions from you all. But one thing that I'm wondering before we do that, I imagine, and you guys have referenced this now a few times, that you've learned some things along the way. And if you were going to start this all over again, there might be a couple things that you would do different. Do you have a quick thought on what one of those big things that you learned, that if you could do it over again, you might do it a bit differently?
I'd just like to reinforce the need not to rush into something. I think the participation in the process of developing something is really, really critical. Mm-hmm. And even though we managed to take forward a participatory process around the National Standards and Empowerment Act, we could have spent longer at it. We could have, because it's really important to get people engaged in it and to help shape it, because that way they own it.
We talk about this all the time, right? If we're going to do a deep engagement process that has the impacts that we want to see, that really centers equity, we need time to do that. That doesn't happen overnight. Sure. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, from my point of view, I think maybe we didn't do it so bad, but one thing that we learn is very important to start really big, as biggest as you can. From the institution perspective, always we try to start small, to do small prototypes to see if things work, and then maybe we can scale. But the feelings of the people and the emotions, you cannot scale them. So if you start small, usually the people are going to find like this is not very interesting, so they're not going to participate, they're not going to join because it's like a small thing. So, and then it's not going to work, and then you're going to feel this is not working, so I'm not going to do better. So it's more important to really trust from the very beginning, even maybe you don't really feel it, whatever, to try to start really huge, and then you will see how the people will respond and how the people will be responsible with what you gave them to them. When you say, okay, like for example in the city of Madrid, we started from the very beginning, like 100 million euros is whatever you want to do it. And then people responded in the proper way. When they really sent amazing ideas and they voted, and all the list of winning the ideas was really amazing. But if we had been starting really small, and we have seen in many other places, then it usually doesn't work. So try to trust the people, try to trust the processes, because of course it will work as everywhere has been working, and try to be ambitious from the very beginning. I think that was very important.
Absolutely. Building trust works in two directions. And also, if we're going to do a deep engagement process and we're asking community members to take on another thing, then it shouldn't be trivial. It has to be real. Real decision making isn't a trivial moment. So any other thoughts on this?
I just had one quick thing to say just about how we ran the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland. So the first one that we did was called the Constitutional Convention, and that actually had politicians involved. There was a politician at each table. The people who brought the Citizens' Assembly idea to government initially did not want that to be the case at all. They said, this is a terrible idea. This is going to go so badly wrong. And it actually didn't go that badly wrong, but it didn't go great. But at the end of it, we still had a fantastic result. But what ended up happening, and I think that this is part of why citizens' assemblies now are going to be part of the fabric of how we do business in Ireland. What we had then was we had buy-in, major buy-in for the process, because the politicians had been around the table, they had seen the energy, they had seen the motivation of the people, they had seen how people behaved, they had seen the suggestions, they had seen some of the recommendations. They were like, oh my God, wow. And also, I don't want to do this again because I don't have any time. It takes too much time. So that was the big learning, I think, in Ireland that I think is useful to share, was that, there was buy-in because they were there at the outset, but they were left behind for the subsequent ones.
Yeah, I think getting folks on the same side of the table is important. Having folks present and visible is also important. But the other thing that you're speaking to here is sometimes conversations are uncomfortable. Real conversations are uncomfortable. And going back to this idea of excellent facilitation is major here. How do we move beyond moments of discomfort in ways that are healthy?
I studied communication, so I'm a firm believer in taking time to communicate, and these processes do take time. At the same time, I have another hat or hijab on, which is I work in government, and I'm accountable to you all as a government employee for how I spend my time and your tax dollars. If we want to take processes that take a long time, we need to be able to give government that time, right? So there's a tension here, and I just want to name that because I think maybe government isn't necessarily the best conveners of things that take a lot of time and participation. The voters of New York City wanted to create a civic engagement commission, and I'm just sitting in this seat thinking about what that actually means, right? Because you're seeking to have government build civic engagement. I think there's an interesting tension, and we just need to pay attention to what that means, because it kind of puts parameters on what we're going to be able to do. And I also think it opens a window of opportunities for partnerships, because there are going to be things that we can't do that other people will be able to do, that the education sector will be able to do, the private sector will be able to do, nonprofit will be able to do. We just need to find ways to work together.
I started off talking a little bit about how important it is to break down silos, and nearly every person in this room raised their hand and they said, I see silos happen all the time when we do this work. And I think a lot of this commentary is really around how do we break that down and establish partnerships in ways that really make sense. Changing infrastructure doesn't look like one side or the other. It looks like building lifelong and long-standing relationships that really shift what we consider the system to be right now. We're talking about a big, big change. And so I think it's important that we think about where accountability lies and how we can support each other in moving that work forward. And so now I'm really excited to take a question or two from the audience.
All right, I see you had your hand up first.
Hi, I'm Veronica Manlow from Brooklyn College, and I have a question for Louise about the Citizen Assembly. And I was particularly curious about how the random selection process works, and wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
So it was stratified random selection. Every fourth house, the chap was knocking on the door. Now, if you understand where I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's quite unusual that anybody would ever knock on my door. So that was it. He had his demographics. He had his stratified. He was trying to fill his. He asked me a bunch of questions at the start. Age, background, whatever. He was trying to categorize me to see if he needed one of me, and turned out he did, and so that's how it worked.
Who did that guy work for?
He worked for a private polling company, so it went out to tender. The government put it out to tender to a polling company who would often go around and do kind of market research type polls. So it was a guy from that company.
As someone who works with young people in youth civic engagement, I'd love to hear some about how you think about the pathways for young people and creating opportunities for them to have the skills and knowledge and opportunities to become informed, engaged citizens and to really play vital roles as they grow. One of the exciting things about participatory budgeting is that young people can vote at age 11, and thinking about how do we layer opportunities to sort of create really authentic opportunities for young people to participate.
I love this question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a wee bit about Scotland if that's helpful. Certainly in the participatory budgeting processes in Scotland, the small grants PB processes that have taken place across the country, quite a lot of them, you can be any age, and so actively encouraged, sort of 8-year-olds to be voting and so on. And so there's been some focused kind of young people's events around PB, but also general locality-based ones where, as I say, the age doesn't matter. We've got a Scottish Youth Parliament in Scotland, which is a fantastic thing. We have active citizenship, I suppose, as part of some of the curriculum in schools. I don't know how much that engages, sort of beyond the school gates in terms of young people. I know that I've got 3 sons, and while they were at school, they get really involved in all the politics in school. They finished school and they didn't get involved in anything after that. So I'm not so sure how it kind of worked, sort of beyond the school gates and into communities and so on. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important one. And again, what we're trying to promote in Scotland is that really young people need to be at the heart of what we do. They're our next generation. They need to be completely and utterly involved. They're a lot braver than a lot of us older folk in terms of what their ambitions are and everything, So, yeah, we need to do much more of that in Scotland. We're getting there, but we need to do more.
Fiona, I think what you're hitting it right on the head there. So often when I have this conversation with folks, my big message is that we need to stop thinking about young people as future leaders. They're leaders right now. And I think it's our responsibility to give them the support and provide them with opportunities to develop the skills to take that to the next level. As you just mentioned, I can't think of a major social change movement that didn't really center the energy and passion that young people bring to this work. Thank you so much for this question. Any other thoughts on youth engagement as we bring in the next question? Okay, yeah, bring it on.
So this question is for Sarah. I formerly worked at a local community board in East Harlem, and prior to my employment there, I had no idea that a community board even existed with a political science bachelor's degree. Somebody said something about design for, design with, which is very interesting because our current mayor struggles very, very much of designing with his constituents, and so with this new commission, which I was the biggest champion for, to get on the ballot and voted for yes for all 3. I want to know, like, what does the infrastructure actually look like that doesn't currently exist in his administration about actually getting information to people's hands? Because when somebody mentioned community organizers, and that's exactly what you actually need, people doing the actual outreach in the community. And so it's very interesting that you said that the public engagement unit actually does that. So I kind of want to know what that capacity actually looks like, because that's the first time that I actually learned that they actually do some type of door knocking. And so what comes to mind is, as a former community board member employee, is the land use process, which is something that was very new to me. And the land use process, the charter revision that's coming up in November, that is not really reaching all New Yorkers. I mean, we had to go beyond the scope of social media. Not everybody's on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. You really have to go to the old-fashioned and really meeting folks where they are. And I'm sorry, there was another one. It was, community boards. 59. It's 59 of them that exist. And so when you think about design for, design with, I think that's really a good entry point to kind of amplify that platform, because all 59 of them, the infrastructure of what it looks like is very drastically different. It's not streamlined whatsoever. And so I'm kind of want to know, what is the role of this commission, the infrastructure that doesn't currently exist, right? We don't have something that currently exists right now in this administration.
there is a public mandate for the Civic Engagement Commission to work with community boards, specifically in the area of land use, to provide urban planning assistance so that people feel that there are more opportunities to learn about the land use process and get more assistance through that process. And there is language in the charter that talks about sort of involving more neutral urban planners. So I think that's going to be interesting to figure that piece of it out and what that looks like as it rolls out. And I think really you're right too. We're all really talking about, you know, how to design these programs with the public's input. And for me, in one of the things I really think we need to understand better is how have people engaged so far, and what are some reasons that they haven't engaged, and how do we overcome some of those obstacles, right? And you're right that the charter revision process, the commission, we were out for the mayoral commission, the city council is out. But again, and even though, as I said, people voted the CEC into existence, but not all New Yorkers know what the Civic Engagement Commission is. So I think it's always going to be process, and it's never going to be perfect. It will always provide opportunities for us to learn and to do better. And I think people on the ground doing this work are the ideal partners for this commission, because they're the ones who are connected, you know, to communities. So I'm hoping to really build a lot of those partnerships for the Civic Engagement Commission, also involving the commissioners who represent many, you know, different communities across the 5 boroughs, and really tapping into their networks as well.
Hi, my name is Alexei Podopov. I'm from Russian-speaking community council. I run also few meetup groups, 25,000 people, and one of them, Data for Democracy, and another one is on social impact. And I have 2 questions. One local question about civic engagement. Russian-speaking community is third largest community in New York. And we really underrepresented, and we don't know where we are, who we are, where we live, and our interests. So nobody's studying us, you know. So maybe from the civic engagement point, we can learn this. This is a local question, and the global question. I organize a hackathon, international hackathon. Around 10,000 people will participate from Israel, Germany, United States, West Coast, East Coast. So I invite you to provide projects, social impact projects. I think civic engagement project is a social impact, right? The question is, I invite you to provide me projects. It will be questions from your side. How can we solve this problem?
Cynthia Farrer from Purple States. We're a video production company that brings the stories and concerns of different people into the discussion about the issues and policies and political choices that face us. But I used to run deliberative polls, and I wanted to say in response to a couple of the questions that if people are interested in the use of random sampling here in this country, you can look at the work of the Jefferson Center's citizen juries. Public Agenda also uses some random sampling and deliberative polls out of Stanford University. But my question is to Shari, because I'm very interested in the difference between the Irish case and what happened in British Columbia with its Citizens Assembly, which was working on election reform, where the suggestions of the assembly were not reflected in the ultimate referendum. And so I think the public referendum. And so I think it's very interesting what you said about how the process you went through seems to have been reflected in the process that the public went through before it voted. And I just wondered what happened between the time of your deliberations and the actual vote in the referendum that accounts for a more deliberative process publicly.
the Citizens Assembly in Ireland came actually from the Canada. That's where we got the idea from. Professor David Farrell from UCD went over. He wrote a book on electoral reforms, and that's how he got invited over. He saw it in action, and he decided then back in 2011 to form a group to bring it to Ireland and to try to get some money and to try to get some political momentum behind it. So that's how it came about. So I'm not sure what else the Canada connection has to do with your question. So you wanted to know at the end, what was it between when we made our recommendations that brought the public along with us? Is that what you're asking specifically? It didn't happen with everything we did either. Some things are still on the very long finger, and they'll be there for a while, I'd say. So it hasn't happened with everything. There's still a list of stuff from the first Constitutional Convention that hasn't gone anywhere because it doesn't suit anybody. So, you know, it hasn't all gone everywhere. But I think what happened with the one on the 8th Amendment in particular was there was an enormous amount of media attention, an enormous amount. Like, it was on the news the whole weekend of our assembly. It was national, all the newspapers, it was all the radio, it was everywhere. So the messages that were coming out, so our assemblies, there was a public area where the lobby groups were allowed to sit in. So an awful lot of the campaigns in the yes and the no, in particular in the yes for change and the pro-choice, a lot of that lobby got their strap lines, if you like, for their campaigns from listening to us. So they got them from real people. And the biggest weekend for us in terms of where there was a big shift was when we had asked if we could have some personal stories. We're like, okay, we've had the legal, we've had the medical, we've had the ethical, we've got all of this historical stuff about how we've dealt with this in Ireland to date. Now we need to hear some real people's stories, and that was the game changer. And every time you bring people in and you get them to share their stories, that's what people listen to, that's what people care about, that's what people have compassion for, and that's where people actually want to do something to help others. So that was where it shifted, definitely.
Louise, thank you. I think we have time for just maybe one more question before we begin to close out. But if you're a person that's sitting here thinking, man, I haven't had a chance to ask a question, don't worry, because when we close this up, our speakers are going to be around and you'll have an opportunity to really have some deeper conversations than what we're able to accomplish here.
Hi, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, panels, for your wonderful experiences from Madrid, from Europe, Dublin, and everybody who's attended here. My name is Suwad Kirama. I am a community activist. Like Dr. Sarah Sayeed said, we wear many hats and scarves and hijabs. And also I'm the director and founder of Center of Advocacy for Development. And I'm here speaking on behalf of a huge and underrepresented, underfunded, underprivileged community, the Arabic community and the Muslim community from New York, and especially in this area, where I personally mobilized almost 1,500 people that I know personally, especially mothers, and we went together and voted for our mayor for the second term. I'm very proud of that. And civic engagements. It's very, very difficult to engage and mobilize a community that has come from a real broken democracy. Countries with severe dysfunctional democracy, dictatorships. So their interest is to get by and get into the American dream and raise their children. But they don't know the power of voting to get the right people, to get them help and fund and be listened to. And I'm really proud of this initiative. And I would like to say to Dr. Sayeed that you are a true inspiration to Muslim women. And I'm here very moved, and you said you needed real partners. And the real partners who will open doors to you for serious, meaningful, effective outreach are community activists. We know that to navigate the system, it's such a dire bureaucracy. Not everyone wakes up wanting to run for office. There are Muslim community with serious issues. I, as a community activist, have tried to reform the child welfare system for no gain because of bureaucracy. So hopefully, with your commission, the newly founded, we will open doors to meaningful participation. Thank you so much. Yeah. She asked me if I have a question. Yes, of course. Oh, thank you. My question is, I just want to share and commit myself and say, Dr. Sayeed, we are here to help you. We are here to volunteer. We are to do everything we can to help you access our community, because the outreach, it needs to be very strategic, very effective. Thank you so much. And how can we do that, Dr. Sayeed? An official question mark.
I think both to you and to the gentleman who asked about the Russian community, I think that it's so important for us. You know, I'd love to get your contact information, and of course I know you, Saad, but just really continuing to extend ourselves to the diverse communities of New York. I have to say that there are no government is perfect. And there are many things that need to be fixed, even in city government. But one of the things that I am most proud of for this administration is that we have built and forged relationships with government where none existed before. We actually, the Community Affairs Unit, and I don't know if you know this, has a liaison to the Russian-speaking community, so I can connect you with her. And the fact that I was, appointed, and it was the first time that someone like me existed in city government. I think that's one of the main things that government needs to do, is have the people on staff who can connect with these communities, who are familiar with the culture, who know the faith community, et cetera. So it's a really important step, and we just need to keep building on that.
Thank you. And as we begin to close out this panel, I have, this is a really hard question, so I just want to tell you that before I ask. So we've talked about so many benefits of this idea of democracy beyond elections. We've talked about the practices, we've talked about increased accountability, we've talked about more equitable governance, we've talked about efficient spending. So here's the real curveball question here as we close out. As you think about your experience and what some of the initiatives that you've been involved in are, what do you think is the most transformative aspect of this idea of democracy beyond elections?
The time and the space for people to consider topics deeply. That is the most transformative thing. And politicians just do not have that time. They just don't. I actually came out of this whole process feeling a little bit sorry for politicians. Imagine, I genuinely did. I thought, God, I actually have a newly found respect for the amount of issues, topics, subjects, bills, coming at them. I go, how in the name of all things natural do they even have a clue of what's going on? How can they read all these things? It's not possible. I tried to do it. I spent a whole weekend for 18 months, and I still had no real clue. Do you know? Better than I had before, but so these are our policymakers. These are people making decisions. So they need our help. They need the help of people taking the time to sit, to listen, and to understand deeply, and to make recommendations from that place.
Definitely. Being invited in helps us all make better decisions together, and it builds the bench and provides resources on both ends when we're able to do that. Thank you. Other thoughts on what the most transformative element of this is?
Yeah, from my point of view, there are two main things that probably are very important. One is what I mentioned before, the fact that with this we change the game. I mean, it's called democracy, but has nothing to do with what we called democracy before. We are not talking anymore about the people, the politician, the responsible. We're not anymore inside this kind of wars between one side or another. We're just talking about problems and solutions. We have in all kinds of this process, we have more than 30,000 projects proposed by the people. We have in the participatory budgeting 400 million euros decided by the people, more than 1,000 projects. It's about the city and changing the city directly by ourselves. So it's totally a different kind of game, and it really changed our city and our society. This is one of the important things, and I think there's another important thing that is totally crucial with this kind of thing. It's about the dignity of our lives. When you get really involved in these kind of things and you understand that you have really the power and you have the space to really take the decisions around you and your society, everything changes. When you go around in your city and you start looking things differently, like I would change that park, I would change that road, I would change the ordinance and how we move in the city, whatever. So it's really, you stop being and like a guest in the city, that somebody is organizing the things, and you are the main actor in the city and in your society. And this is something that is really changed a lot. Maybe you don't see the effect, but inside of you, the dignity, how you live the city and your life is totally different. I think it was one of the most important things.
So we're talking about real power, but also real ownership and pride in that, and being able to point to tangible change in community that you were involved in, and that was verified by other community members as well.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's just been said, but I also think that the potentially most transformative element in participatory democracy is about addressing inequality. Because I think, at the moment, decisions are made on behalf of people. We don't get to hear the diverse views, the lived experience, what it's like. Do you know what I mean? If you live in different communities, and those decisions are made on behalf of those communities. So from that point of view, I think we need to have the voices in the room, and participatory democracy allows us to do that. And that's ultimately going to give us a much more balanced view of what the needs are and what the aspirations are from very multiple diverse communities right across the piece. So from my point of view, it's about addressing the inequality gap.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is really centering equity and being able to address that in ways that matter and that are not just lip service, and that have some data behind them and have some real impacts to solve those problems once we define them, to be able to develop solutions that are beyond what we thought was possible before.
I think it's really changing the way we view our responsibility as members of communities and as society. Because I think for so long we have focused on elections and casting our vote. And once that's done and the person we want is in office, we tend to not stay engaged. And if we don't like what the person in office is doing, we tend to mobilize around to vote them out. But how do you continue to have responsibility even after you vote someone you want in office? How do you build a relationship with that person? And fundamentally, I think it means changing how we see our place in community. And that part of what we need to do is to hold our elected officials accountable in an ongoing way for how they're taking care of the needs of people who are marginalized, for how they're including the voices of people who haven't been heard, for how they're building momentum, and really for how we fulfill what the promise is of a democracy, right? It is about the voice of the people. So to continue to keep that voice engaged in an ongoing way, and I think fundamentally it starts with the people themselves, to say that we're responsible to do that.
Understanding your role and what your power is, and being able to hold folks accountable, not only at two choice moments, but beyond that, and understanding what support looks like on both sides, I think is a major piece of what transformation looks like as we consider and really move forward this democracy beyond elections effort. And one way that you can be involved in this and stay connected to Democracy Beyond Elections is by visiting participatorybudgeting.org/TBE, what we brought with us today was an overview of this landscape analysis that was conducted, so you have an opportunity to get a little bit deeper into what some of the work that was described on the stage today looks like, and then get connected with us as we continue to roll out and really crystallize around what this means. Tomorrow we'll be sitting with some of our thought partners. Folks are traveling from really far and wide to really think about what this could and should look like, and we're really excited to come back with a report as a result of that, and some hopeful calls to action for you all. So please keep an eye on this, and please stay connected with us as we really think about how we begin to transform the systems that we're in ways that are beyond what we think is possible, but really what we know is possible from the examples that we've seen in other spaces. Ladies and gentlemen, please make a round of applause for our amazing speakers. And again, thank you all for coming out. Make some noise for yourselves, please. We really appreciate it. And let's hang out for a bit. You're welcome to stay. We have a reception here. And so let's get into some more conversation. Thank you all.